this lecture, we'll be looking into the chapter, The Challenges of Cultural Diversity. So, before we begin the chapter, we'll look into the questions. So, by reading this chapter, you will be able to understand what is meant by cultural diversity, why is India considered to be a very diverse country, what is community identity and how is it formed, why is it difficult to define the nation, how are nation and state related in modern society, why are states often suspicious of cultural diversity, what is regionalism, what factors is it usually based on, in your opinion, what has the linguistic recognition of states helped or harmed India? Okay, now seventh question is what is a minority? Why do minorities need protection from the state? What is communalism? What are the different senses in which secularism has been understood in India? What is the relevance of civil society organizations today? So, this chapter forms a very crucial part in our GS1 part of GS1 series, that is this syllabus in the UPSC. Okay, the term diversity emphasizes differences rather than inequalities. When we say that India is a nation of great cultural diversity, we mean that there are many different types of social groups and communities living there. Okay, these are communities defined by cultural markers such as language is there, religion is there, sect, race, or caste. Okay, when we look at India, each state we find a different culture, different types, different face shapes, different color of the persons or of the people there. Okay, so all the people are diverse. Okay, when these diverse communities are also part of a large entity like a nation, then difficulties may be created by competition or conflict between them. Okay, that is why cultural diversity can present tough challenges. The difficulties arise from the fact that the cultural identities are very powerful. They can arouse intense passions and are often able to mobilize large number of people. Sometimes cultural differences are accompanied by economic and social inequalities and this further complicates things. Measures to address the inequalities or injustices suffered by one community can provoke oppositions from other communities. Okay, the situation is made worse by when scarce resources like river waters, jobs, and government funds have to be shared. Okay, suppose in the case of the Maratha issue, we see that in Maharashtra, lot of other the people from other states came to that state. So the Marathas, they they wanted autonomy. They wanted the Marathas to have major share in the government jobs and all. Okay, that led to clashes between the people of the state and the people who came as residents over there or from other states. Okay, that is an example of this. Okay, cultural communities and the nationwide. Okay, the first one is what is the importance of cultural or community identity? Okay, when we ask, when you define yourself, there are some traits like who am I? Who am I? How am I different from others? How do others understand and comprehend me? What goals and aspirations should I have? Constantly crop up in all life right from childhood. We are able to answer many of these questions because of the way in which we are socialized. Our community, our parents have taught us something, our friends, our social group, all these things have contributed to our identity, creating an identity. Okay, taught how to live in a society by our immediate families and our community in various senses. Okay, and our community provides us the language and the cultural values through which we comprehend the world. Okay, now community identity is based on birth, belonging rather than on some form of acquired qualifications or accomplishment. It is actually an inherited quality or a one that you are born into. Okay, it is what we are rather than what we have become. We don't have to do anything to be born into a community. In fact, no one has any choice but about which family or community or country they are born into. You're born into this country, therefore you are Indian. You are born into the state of Kerala, so you are a Malayali. You are born into a state of Tamil Nadu, so you are a Tamilian. Okay, nobody can change it. These kind of identities are called as ascriptive, that is, they are determined by the accidents of birth and do not involve any choice on the part of the individuals concerned. Okay, we often identify so strongly with communities we have done nothing to deserve. Okay, past no exams, there are no exam or qualifications required. Okay, demonstrated no skill or competence. This is very unlike this is very unlike belonging to say a profession or team. Okay, doctors or architects have to pass exams and demonstrate their competence. But in the case of community level recognition, these all things are not required. Okay. The second feature of this community identity or ascriptive identities and community feeling is that they are universal. Everyone has a motherland, a mother tongue, a family, a faith. This may not necessarily be strictly true to every individual, but it is true in a general sense. Okay, we are all equally committed and loyal to our respective identities. Once again, it is possible to come across people who may not be particularly committed to one or the other aspect of their identity. Okay, we can find people who are not loyal to their society. They have no interest in patriotism. They have no interest in nationalism. Okay, all these kind of people are also present in the society. And on the other hand, there are people who are devoted to the nation. They want to work for the nation. Okay, two kinds of people are also there. Okay, but the possibility of this commitment is potentially available to most people because of these conflicts that involve our communities are very hard to deal with it. Suppose, say, there is a conflict between uh, a group which supports a concept of A, and there is another group that supports the concept of B, and you are a person belonging to A group, and naturally, you are not interested in the conflict. And being a part of A group, you cannot go and say we need to negotiate between A and B. Okay, that is a kind of like the members of the B people, they won't trust you, and also A people find it you are cheating or you are going against the will of the community. Okay, each side in the conflict thinks that the other side as a hated enemy, and there is a tendency to exaggerate the virtues of one's side as well as the vices of the other. Thus, when two nations are at war, patriots in each nation see other as an enemy aggressor. Each side believes that God and the truth are on their side. In the heat of the moment, it is very hard for people on either side to see that they are constructing matching but reversed mirror images and or each other. Okay. Suppose India and Pakistan is having a war. In both sides, there are people who are loyal to the specific nations. And at the same time, only difference is that one is supporting India, other is supporting Pakistan. Okay, that is the only difference. On both sides, these are human beings. Okay. Now we look at communities, nations, and nation states. Okay, at the simplest level, a nation is a sort of large scale community. Now we have discussed community. Now we are looking at it in a large scale. It is a community of communities. Members of a community of a nation share the desire to be part of the same political collectivity. This desire of a political unity usually expresses itself as an aspiration to form a state. In its most general sense, the term state refers to an abstract entity consisting of a set of political legal institutions. We have our constitution, we have our laws, okay, claiming control over a particular geographical territory and the people living in it. So, what does a state have? State has a political legal institutions and also a geographical territory. Okay, and it has people who are living in the particular territory. Now we look into Max Weber's well-known definition of state. Okay, body that successfully claims a monopoly to legitimize force in a particular territory. A nation is a particular or is a peculiar sort of community that is easy to describe but hard to define. It is easy to describe. We can put it in words. But as a definition, can you do it? It's a feeling. Okay. We know and can describe many specific nations founded on the basis of common cultural, historical, and political institutions like a shared religion, language, ethnicity, history, and regional culture. But it is hard to come up with any defining features, any characteristics that a nation must possess. For every possible criterion, there are exceptions and counterexamples. For example, there are many nations that do not share a single common language, religion, ethnicity, and so on. On the other hand, there are many languages, religions, and ethnicities that share across nations. Suppose English people, we can find people who speaking English in India also. French people. We can find people speaking French language, which is the official language of the France in India. Okay, when we go to Morocco also they speak. We can find French-speaking people. So all these aspects are there. There sometimes the language, all that concepts can be a shared one. Okay, the criterion that comes closest to distinguishing a nation is a state. Unlike the other kinds of communities mentioned before, nations are communities that have a state of their own. Okay, that is why the two are joined with a hyphen to form this term nation state. Okay, generally speaking, in recent times there have been one to one bond between nation and state. But this is a new development. It was not true in the past that a single state could represent only one nation, that every nation must have its own state. Now we come to the example. In the previous few years back, there was a nation called Soviet Union that explicitly recognized that people it governed were of different nations, and more than 100 such internal nationalities were recognized. In Soviet, we had the Russians, we had the Chechenians, we had the Polish, we had the Georgians. All these people lived together as a collective entity under the USSR. Okay. Similarly, people constituting a nation may actually be citizens or residents of different states. For example, there are more Jamaicans living outside Jamaica than in Jamaica. That is, the population of non-resident Jamaicans exceeds that of resident Jamaicans. Usain Bolt. Usain Bolt is a Jamaican. Okay. He currently most of the time, although he represents the country, he most of the time we can find him outside the country, especially in the US. Okay. A different example is to provide a dual citizenship law. These laws allow citizens of a particular state to also simultaneously be citizens of another state. Thus, to cite in one instance, Jewish Americans may be citizens of Israel as well as the USA. They may even serve in the armed forces of one country without losing their citizenship in the other country. Okay. So, in short, today it is hard to define a nation in any way other than to say that it is a community that has succeeded in acquiring a state of its own. Interestingly, the opposite has also become increasingly true. Now, you may be a little confused what is actually it is about, what is actually nation state or something. Okay. Now, what is the cultural identity? There may be some confusion. Okay. But as we have seen in the preceding paragraphs, there is no historically fixed or logically necessary relationship between a nation state and the varied forms of community that it could be based on. This means that there is no predetermined answer to the question. How could the state part of the nation state treat the different kinds of community that make up the nation? Okay, most states have generally been suspicious of cultural diversity and have tried to reduce or eliminate it. Okay, in the case of Turkey, they tried to kill all the Armenian population. Okay, in the case of Pakistan, we can find Pakistan, the majority Sunni community trying to eliminate the Shia community. Okay, all this kind of ethnic cleansing, all this kind of eliminating cultural diversity is happening in a nation state. It is also part of the nation state. Now we discuss two terms, assimilinist and integrationist policies. Policies that promote assimilation are aimed at persuading, encouraging, or forcing all citizens to adopt a uniform set of cultural values or norms. These values and norms are usually entirely or largely those of the dominant social group. Okay, suppose there is a particular group in a country and they follow particular customs. And there are some numerous small communities also living in the same country. And one day the country's leader says that we need to follow what the dominant group is following. You need to follow that particular custom. That can cause a clash between the cultures. Okay. Other non-dominant and subordinate groups in society are expected to or required to give up their own cultural values and adopt the prescribed ones. Okay, policies promoting integration are different in style but not in overall objective. They insist that the public culture be restricted to a common national pattern, while all non-national cultures are to be regulated to the private sphere. In this case, too, there is the danger of the dominant group's culture being treated as the national culture. Okay, now you can see what the problem is. There is no necessary relationship between any specific form of community and the modern form of state. Any of the many bases of community identity, like language, religion, ethnicity, and so on, may or may not lead to the nation formation. There are no guarantees. In our country, for example, there are multiple languages, there are multiple religions, yet we exist as a single nation. So, being, say, only Hindi speaking people should form the nation, that is also possible. But at the same time, even without all the languages together, also the nation can be formed. Okay, so languages, religions, all these aspects are not necessarily a part of nation formation. Okay, that is why states generally tend to favor a single homogeneous national identity in the hope of being able to control and manage it. However, suppressing cultural diversity can be very costly in terms of the alienation of minority or subordinated communities whose cultures is treated as non-national. Moreover, the very act of suppression can provoke the opposite effect of intensifying community identity. In the case of Sri Lanka, we have seen when the constitution recognized the Sinhalese as the official people or official language. That time it provoked the Tamilians in the north of the island. Okay, that led to a brutal civil war. Okay, so respecting all the cultures in that nation is necessary for the development of the particular state. Okay, now we look into another aspect, cultural diversity and India in nation state. Okay, Indian nation state is socially and culturally one of the most diverse countries of the world. It has a population about 1.21 billion people according to the census of 2011. Currently, the second largest and soon to be the largest national population in the world. These billion plus people speak about 1632 different languages and dialects. As many as 22 of these languages have been officially recognized and placed under the 8th schedule of the constitution. So the question comes in prelims, which schedule in the constitution is responsible for languages? You can say 8th schedule. Okay, so thus guaranteeing their legal status. In terms of religion, about 80% of the people are Hindus, who in turn are regionally specific, plural in beliefs. Even in Hinduism, we can see different castes, different languages, people belonging to different states following the same religion. Okay, all these kind of separation are there, and even in the Muslim population, that which forms 14.2% of the country's total population, which is about third largest number of Muslims in the world after Indonesia and Pakistan. Even in that community also we can see divisions about Shias, the Mujahideens, all these people, there are divisions, and we can see in different states Muslims speaking different languages, following different customs. Okay, even though they form a common identity as Muslims. And there are other communities which are the Christians, which form 2.3 percentage, Sikhs which are 1.7 percentage, Buddhists 0.7, and Jains 0.4 percentage. But because India has a huge population, these small percentages, they add up to a very large absolute numbers. Okay, now we have discussed about the assimilationist and the integralist model. In India, India's situation fits neither in both of the categories. Okay, how the demand for such a model has been expressed. Okay, uh, model about assimilationist nation have been expressed by some sections of the dominant Hindu community. Although national integration is a constant theme in state policy, India has not been integralist. Okay, the constitution declares a state to be a secular state. But religion, language, and other such factors are not banished from the public sphere. Okay, in these communities, there have been explicitly recognized by the states. These are recognized, these religions, these communities have been recognized by the state. By international standards, very strong constitutional protection is offered to minority religions. In general, India's problems have been more in the sphere of implementation and practice rather than in the laws. Everything is there in terms of law, everything is there in terms of amendments, is written down in our constitution. But when it comes to the implementation or in the execution part, we are lagging behind. Okay, now we come to another important aspect, that is regionalism. Regionalism in India is rooted in India's diversity of languages, cultures, tribes, and religions. It is also encouraged by the geographical concentration of these identity markers in particular regions and fueled by a sense of regional deprivation. Indian federalism has been a means of accommodating these regional sentiments. So now we will look into how the federal structure of the country plays in uniting our states. Okay, we will look into the historical aspect of Indian federalism. After independence, initially the Indian state continued with the British Indian arrangement, dividing India into large provinces, also called presidencies, namely three of them, that is Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta. Okay, and there were other princely states also. These were large multi ethnic and multilingual provincial states constituting the major political administrative units of a semi federal state called the Union of India. For example, the old Bombay state, continuation of Bombay presidency, was a multilingual state of Marathi was there, Gujarati, Kannada, and Konkani speaking people. Similarly, when we go to the Madras state, it constituted by Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, and Malayalam speaking people. Okay, in addition to the presidencies and provinces directly administered by the British Indian government, there were also a large number of princely states and principalities all over India. The larger princely states included Mysore, Kashmir, Baroda, but all soon after the adoption of the constitution, all these units of the colonial era had been recognized into ethno-linguistic states within the Indian Union in response to strong popular agitations. Language coupled with regional and tribal identity, not religion, has therefore, but not religion, has therefore provided the most powerful instrument in the formation of ethno national identity in India. However, this does not mean that all linguistic communities have got statehood. For instance, in the creation of three new states in 2000, namely Chhattisgarh, Uttaranchal, and Gujarat and Jharkhand, language did not play a prominent role. Rather, a combination of ethnicity based on tribal identity, language, regional deprivation, and ecology provided the basis of Indian's regionalism, resulting in statehood. Currently, there are 29 states and 9 union territories. Okay, that is centrally administered within Indian nation state. Now we will look at, there are some particular aspects before this is historical background about how the states were divided based on linguistic identity or based on language. So in the initial times, the idea of linguistic division of state was not acceptable by the then government, because the government thought that if the people are divided or states are formed based on language, what happens? There can lead to separatist movement, or the people going away from India. Based on they may give loyalty to their own states. So this can lead to divisions. Okay, all these kind of fears existed in the minds of the government or the founding fathers. So there were several commissions. We will discuss all these commissions and aspects in the polity when we discuss polity in GS2. So no need to worry about it. So finally, there was a popular protest or satyagraha by Poti Sriramalu, and what happened? He died. Poti Sriramalu died. He was a Gandhian. He died. He fasted unto death and he faced death. So what happened? This forced the government to form Andhra Pradesh based on linguistic identity. Okay, so that led to the formation of linguistic states. Okay, after that we come to the formation of Jharkhand and or Jharkhand, Uttaranchal, Chhattisgarh and all. Okay. Now, there are certain functions, certain subjects that are dealt or which are to be done by the state, which are to be done by the center. Okay, so we will discuss all these things now. Respecting regional sentiments is not just a matter of creating states. This has to be backed with an institutional structure that ensures their viability as respectively autonomous units within a larger federal structure. In India, this is done by constitutional provisions defining the powers of the states and the center. There are list of subjects or areas of governance which are the exclusive responsibilities of either state or center, along with the concurrent list of areas where both are allowed to operate. That is, the state and the nation can operate in concurrent list. Okay, the state legislatures determine the composition of the upper house of the parliament, the Rajya Sabha. In addition, there are periodic committees and commissions that decide on center state relations. For example, the Finance Commission, which is set up every 10 years to decide on sharing of tax revenues between center and the states. Up to 2017, each 5-year plan was involved detailed state plans prepared by the state planning commissions of each state. The goods and services tax council includes the state members. These are some examples where the involvement of states are also there. On the whole of the federal system has worked fairly well, though there remain some continuous issues. Since the era of liberation, there is a concern among policymakers, politicians, and scholars about increasing inter-regional economic and infrastructural inequalities. As private investments is given a greater role in economic development, considerations of regional equality get diluted. This happens because private investors generally want to invest in already developed state where infrastructure and other facilities are better. Unlike private industry, the government can give some consideration to regional equity rather than just to seek maximize profit. So, left to itself, the market economy tends to increase the gap between developed and backward regions. Now, this is another interesting aspect: minority rights and nation building. Okay, in Indian nationalism, the dominant trend was marked by an inclusive and democratic vision. Inclusive because it recognized diversity and plurality, democratic because it sought to do away the discrimination and exclusion and bring forth a just and equitable society. The term people has not been seen in exclusive terms as referring to any specific group defined by religion, ethnicity, race, or caste. Okay, the ideas of humanism influenced Indian nationalists, and the ugly aspects of exclusive nationalism were extensively commented upon by leading figures like Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore. Okay, TBF. This basically means that we identified people as people rather than based on their religion or ethnicity or caste. And there were also comments about exclusive nationalism that we have discussed earlier, majority a religious community identifying India to be their own. So all these kind of aspects were talked or discussed in the by the national leaders. To be effective, the ideas of inclusive nationalism, which includes all the community, all the ethnicity, okay, has to be built, had to be built into constitution. For as already discussed, there is a very strong tendency for the dominant group to assume that their culture, language, or religion is synonymous with the nation state. We are a diverse country. Okay, it doesn't mean there since there are a particular group of people who are greater in number that they can dominate the figure. Okay. However, for a strong and democratic nation, special constitutional provisions are required to ensure the rights of all groups and those of minority groups in particular. So there should be particular rights, particular constitutional laws or provisions, so that the minority groups can also exercise their freedom. A brief discussion on the definition of minorities will enable us to appreciate the importance of safeguarding minority rights for a strong, united, and democratic nation. The notion of minority groups is widely in sociology and is more than a merely numerical distinction. It usually involves some sense of relative disadvantage. Okay, thus, privileged minorities, such as extremely wealthy people, are not usually referred to as minorities. If they are, the term is qualified in some way as the phrase privileged minority. Okay, there can be rich minority, people belonging to the minority, but they are emphasized or they are called as privileged minority. When minority is used without qualification, it generally implies a relatively small but also disadvantaged group. So the sociological sense of minority also implies that we have seen in basically minority defined to be a disadvantaged group. Okay, they also group in the sociological aspect also minority implies that the members of the minority form a collectivity. That is, they have a strong sense of group solidarity, a feeling of togetherness and belonging. This is linked to the disadvantage because of the experience of being subjected to prejudice and discrimination usually heightens feelings of intra-group loyalty and interest. Suppose we say that uh, when in the case of the Kashmiri Pandits they were forced out of their homes from Kashmir by insurgents. Okay, because they felt inferior, they were excluded by the majority people living there. So the Kashmiri Pandits in return they identified the Pandits, the community of Pandits as their own. There was a sense of belonging in that particular community. Okay, thus groups that may be minorities in a statistical sense, such as people who are left-handed or people belong to the 29th century, 29th February, are not minorities in sociological sense because they do not form a collectivity. However, it is possible to have anomalous instances where a minority group is disadvantaged in one sense but not in another. For example, religious minorities like Parsis and Sikhs, of which they are well off economically. Parsis, they are traders, Sikhs, they are rich farmers. Okay, but they may still be disadvantaged in cultural sense because they are small numbers relative to the overwhelming majority of Hindus. Religious or cultural minorities need social protection because of the demographic dominance of the majority. In democratic politics, it is always possible to convert a numerical majority into political power through elections. This means that the religious or cultural minorities, regardless of their economic or social position, are politically vulnerable. They must face the risk that the majority community will capture political power and use the state machinery to suppress their religious and cultural institutions, ultimately forcing them to abandon their distinctive identity. So Ambedkar's understanding of minority was that minorities are an explosive force. If it erupts, can blow up the whole fabric of the nation. So what happens if the minorities they can cause tensions if they are not dealt with or their needs are not represented by the majority community, it can lead to clashes or it can lead to differences between both the communities. Okay, the makers of the constitutions were aware of that a strong and united nation could be built only if all sections of the people had the freedom to practice their religion and to develop their culture and language. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the chief architect of the Constitution, made this point clear in the Constitution Assembly. Okay, in the last 3 decades, we have witnessed how non-recognition of the rights of the different groups of people of the country can have grave implications of the national unity. One of the key issues that led to the formation of Bangladesh was unwillingness of the Pakistani state to recognize the cultural and linguistic rights of the people of Bangladesh. What happened in Pakistan? In Pakistan, the Western Pakistan was dominated by Urdu speaking people, while on the eastern side it was the Bengali speaking community. But the control was with the Urdu speaking community. They actually were inferior, or they disliked the Bengali speaking community on the eastern side, although they were connected by a common sense of religion. But the linguistic identity which the Urdu speaking Western Pakistan failed to recognize, this led to clash and ultimately forming Bangladesh. Okay. Finally, it is useful to note that the minorities exist everywhere, not just in India. In most nation states, there tend to be dominant social group, whether cultural, ethnic, racial, or religious. Nowhere in the world is there a nation state consisting of exclusively a single homogeneous cultural group. Even where there was almost truce, as in the case of Iceland, New Sweden, or South Korea, modern capitalism, colonialism, and large-scale migration have brought in plurality of groups. Even the smallest state will have minorities, whether in religious, ethnic, linguistic, or racial terms. Now we will look into detail about communalism. Okay, communalism is also another important topic in our UPSC syllabus. Okay, in everyday language, communalism refers to aggressive chauvinism based on religious identity. Chauvinism itself is an attitude that sees one's own group as the only legitimate over the group, with other groups being seen by definition as inferior, illegitimate, or opposed. Thus, to simplify, the communalism is an aggressive political ideology. It's a political ideology linked to religion. This is a peculiarly Indian or perhaps South Asian meaning that is different from the sense of the ordinary English word. In the English language, communal means something related to community or collectively as different from an individual. English meaning is neutral, whereas the South Asian meaning is strongly charged. The charge may be seen as positive if one is sympathetic to communalism, or negative if one is opposed to it. Okay, it is important to emphasize that communalism is about politics, not about religion. Okay, all the communalists are intensely, although we can see political parties idolizing or emphasizing about their religion for vote, and they perform pujas, they perform namaz, they go to churches, they go to masjids, and they are deeply involved in the religion, but they are ultimately looking for a political gain. A communist may or may not be a devout person, or devout believers may or may not be communist. However, all communalists do believe in political identity based on religion. The key factor is the attitude towards those who believe in other kinds of identities, including other religion based identities. Communalists cultivate an aggressive political identity and are prepared to condemn or attack everyone who does not share their identity. Okay, one of the characteristic features of the communalism is its claim that religious identity overrides everything. Whether one is poor or rich, whatever one's occupation, caste, or political beliefs, it is religion alone that counts. All Hindus are the same as are all Muslims, Sikhs, and so on. This is the effect of constructing large and diverse groups as singular and homogeneous. It is noteworthy that this is done for one's own group as well as for others. Okay, this would obviously rule out the possibility that Hindus, Muslims, and Christians belong to Kerala. For example, they may have as much as more common with each other. See, the Malayalis, they may be belonging to Hinduism, Islam, or Christianity. Yet they find themselves as a common aspect when compared to the same religious people in Kashmir, Gujarat, and Nagaland. In Kashmir, we have Muslims. In Gujarat, we have Hindus. In Nagaland, where Christian majority is there. Okay, so it also denies the possibility that, for instance, landless agricultural laborers may have a lot in common, even if they belong to different religions and regions. Okay, the common aspirations are different in different areas. Okay, and religion always, as we have seen in the case of East and West Pakistan, is a better example of this. Okay, even though they belong to same religion, there are differences. Communalism is a especially important issue in India because it has been a recurrent source of tension and violence. During communal riots, people become faceless. What happens? They are willing to kill, rape, and loot members of other communities in order to redeem their pride. Okay, now why? Why are they doing this? Okay, a commonly cited justification is to avenge the deaths or dishonor suffered by their co religionists elsewhere or even in the distant past. No religion has been wholly exempt from communal violence of one kind or another. Every religious community has faced this violence in greater or lesser degree, although the proportionate impact is far more traumatic for minority communities. To the extent that governments can be held responsible for communal riots, no government or ruling party can claim to be blameless in this regard. In fact, two most traumatic contemporary instances of communal violence occurred under each of the major political parties, that is the BJP and the Congress. The anti-Sikh riots in Delhi in 1984 and also the anti-Muslim violence in Gujarat. The Sikh riots were conducted by the under the Congress regime, and the anti-Muslim violence was conducted by the BJP government under the BJP government. Okay, India has had a history of communal riots from pre-independence times, often as a result of the divide and rule policy adopted by the colonial rulers. But colonialism did not invent inter-community conflict. There has a long history of pre-colonial conflicts and it certainly cannot be blamed for post-independence riots and killings. Indeed, if we wish to look for instances of religious, cultural, regional, and ethnic conflict, they can be found in almost every phase of our history. But we should not forget that we also have long tradition of religious pluralism, ranging from peaceful coexistence to actual intermixing or syncretism. This syncretic heritage is clearly evident in the devotional songs and poetry of Bhakti and Sufi moments. Okay, now we come to the next important aspect, that is secularism. Okay, this is also another important topic in the UPSC. As we have seen above, the meanings of the term communal and communalism are more or less clear despite the bitter controversies between supporters and opponents. By contrast, the terms secular and secularism are very hard to define clearly, although they are also equally controversial. In fact, secularism is among the most complex terms in social and political theory. In the Western context, so I'll briefly explain what is the Western context of secularism. It basically means the separation of church and the state. The church cannot involve in the state's matters, and also the state cannot involve in the church's matters. So there is a clear cut division. It was due to the previous experience of the Western countries, especially in France. There they saw the fall of the estates. All these aspects, the French Revolution, all these aspects contributed to the formation of Western secularism. Okay, now we come to the Indian meanings of secularism. The Indian meanings of secular and secularism include Western sense but also involve others. The most common use of secular in everyday language is the opposite of communal. So, a secular person or state is one that does not favor any particular religion or others. Secularism, in this sense, is the opposite of religious chauvinism, and it does not necessarily imply hostility to religion as such. It, the terms of state religion relationship, this sense of secularism implies equal respect for all religions rather than separation or distancing. For example, the secular Indian state declares public holidays to mark festivals of all religions. One kind of difficulty is created by the tension between the Western sense of the state maintaining a distance from all religions and the Indian sense of the state giving equal respect to all religions. Supporters of each sense are upset by whatever the state does not uphold the other sense. Okay, another set of complications is created by the tension between the Indian state's simultaneous commitment to secularism as well as the protection of minorities. There are certain category of people who ask why the minority people are using up the resources that are equally contributed by the majority people. So that is a case. So the protection of minority requires that they are given special consideration in a context where the normal working of the political system places them at a disadvantage the majority with the majority community. By providing such protection immediately invites the accusation of favoritism or appeasement of minorities. Opponents argue that the secularism of this sort is only an excuse to favor the minorities in return for their vote. So, vote bank, they say it is all part of the vote bank politics. These are kind of controversies become harder to solve when the political parties and social movements develop a vested interest in keeping them alive. In recent times, communalists of all religions have contributed in deadlock. The resurgence of the newly acquired political power of the Hindu communalist has added a further dimension of complexity. Clearly, a lot needs to be done to improve our understanding of secularism as a principle and our practice of it as a policy. Okay, the first generation of leaders of independent India chose to have a liberal secular state governed by democratic constitution. Accordingly, the state was conceived in culturally neutral terms, and the nation was also conceived as an inclusive territorial political community of all citizens. Nation building was viewed only as a state driven process of economic development and social transformation. The expansion was the expectation was that the universalization of citizenship rights and the induction of cultural pluralities into the democratic process of open and competitive politics would evolve new civic equations among the ethnic communities between them and the states. These expectations may not have materialized in the manner expected. But ever since independence, the people of India, through their direct political participation, election verdicts have repeatedly asserted their support for secular constitution and state. Their voices should count. So there was another question about the role of civil society, the democracy. So when does a state become an authoritarian state? This an authoritarian state is the opposite of a democratic state. It is a state in which people have no voice and those in power are not accountable to anyone. Authoritarian states often limit or abolish civil liberties like freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of the political activity, right to protection from wrongful use of authority, right to the due processes of law, and so on. Apart from authoritarianism, there is also possibility that the state institutions become unable or unwilling to respond to the needs of the people because of the corruption, inefficiency, and lack of resources. In short, there are many reasons why a state may not be all that it should be. Non state actors and institutions become important in this context. Okay, now what are these non state factors? So, civil society comes into the picture. Civil society is a name given to the broad arena which lies beyond the private domain of the family but outside the domain of both state and the market. Civil society is a non state and non market part of the public domain in which individuals get together voluntarily to create institutions and organizations. It is a sphere of active citizenship. Here, individuals take up social issues, try to influence the state, and to make demands on it, pursue their collective interest, or seek support for a variety of causes. It consists of voluntary associations, organizations, or institutions formed by groups of citizens. It includes political parties, media institutions, trade unions, non governmental organizations, religious organizations, and other kinds of collective entities. The main criteria for inclusion in civil society are that the organization should not be state controlled and it should not be purely commercial profit making entity. Thus, there are certain examples you can go through it. So, we all know about the emergency, right? The emergency shocked people into active participation and helped energize the many social civil society initiatives that emerged in 1970s. This period saw the resurgence of wide variety of social movements, including women's. Actually, the emergency was an example of authoritarian government. Okay, so it led to the resurgence of wide variety of social movements, including women's, environmental, human rights, and Dalit movements. Today, activities of civil society organizations have an even wider range, including advocacy and lobbying activity with national and international agencies, as well as active participation in various movements. Issues taken up are diverse, ranging from tribal struggles to land rights. For land rights, devolution in urban governance, campaigns against rape, violence against women, rehabilitation of those displaced by dams, all these kind of social issues are taken up by civil societies. Okay, this includes media persons also, or no, NGOs, all these aspects are included in this. Okay. Amongst the significant recent initiatives in the campaign for the right was the campaign for right to information, beginning of the agitation in rural Rajasthan for the release of information on government funds spent on village development. This effort grew into a nationwide campaign. Despite the resistance of the bureaucracy, the government was forced to respond to the campaign and pass a new law formally acknowledging the citizens' right to information. So, this is an excellent example how the civil society functions or was able to bring changes in the governmental structure, in the policy making. Okay, so this can be quoted in your main answers about the about the uh, how the civil society plays a role in policy making. Okay, I hope today's lecture was productive for you guys. So until next time we meet again, God bless you all. Jai Hind.